Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at something pretty interesting. We're going to be exploring how Shakespeare's plays, some of the most famous plays ever, are really kind of intertwined with the religious landscape of early modern England. Now, to help guide us on this journey, we've got this amazing collection of essays called Shakespeare and Early Modern Religion by a whole bunch of leading scholars.
It's really interesting, this collection, because it's like having a panel of experts.
Oh, yeah.
All kind of weighing in and offering their different perspectives.
Right, and sometimes even disagreeing.
Exactly.
It makes it really, really fascinating. So hopefully by the end of this deep dive, all of our listeners will have picked up some new insights into the religious context behind some of Shakespeare's most famous plays and maybe even some of their favorite characters.
Yeah, you know what's really cool about all this is we're not just talking about straight up historical context here. We're actually going to be uncovering how these really intense religious debates and anxieties of Shakespeare's time actually made their way into the language, the characters, even the themes of his plays.
Yeah, it's like those anxieties of the time are actually woven into the very fabric of the plays themselves.
Exactly.
But before we get too deep into all that, I've always been curious about Shakespeare's own religious beliefs. Like, is there any way to really know what he actually believed, what was in his heart?
Well, to be honest, pinning down Shakespeare's personal beliefs, it's a little tricky.
I bet.
There's been a lot of debate for centuries, especially about his family's possible Catholic leanings. Especially given that 18th century document, the Borromeo Testament, supposedly signed by Shakespeare's dad, John, as a Catholic. However, most scholars these days, they think it's probably a forgery. But still, it just adds another layer of intrigue to this whole thing, doesn't it?
It really does, especially when you consider that England at the time was very, very strongly anti-Catholic.
Yeah.
So did Shakespeare kind of conform to the dominant Protestant views, do you think? Or did he push back?
That's where it gets really interesting. Because despite that pressure to conform, Shakespeare's plays, they demonstrate a very kind of surprising level of nuance when it comes to portraying all these different religious perspectives.
So he wasn't just like churning out pro-Protestant propaganda.
No, not at all. Look at King John, for example. He could have easily demonized the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah?
To play to the anti-Catholic sentiment of the time, but he doesn't.
Yeah, that's right. And even in Henry V, you've got a Catholic king, like right out there establishing chantries. That doesn't exactly scream like Protestant playwright, does it?
Yeah, no, it really complicates things. And then you've got Hamlet with the whole ghost from purgatory.
Oh, right.
Which is a very distinctly Catholic concept. Set against Hamlet's own kind of musings on providence. Which lean more towards the Protestant ideas. It's like Shakespeare's deliberately presenting these totally contrasting viewpoints. And just letting the audience kind of wrestle with them.
Yeah, it's like presenting both sides and letting the audience decide, right?
Exactly.
Do you think he was trying to maybe provoke his audiences a little bit or encourage them to move past those kind of simplistic interpretations of religion?
Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, you have to remember that Shakespeare wasn't writing in a vacuum. He was very much engaging with all these complex theological debates happening all around him.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And the theater was, in many ways, a platform to sort of explore these conflicts and all their messiness.
It makes you wonder if the theater almost served as a kind of safe space for those discussions, you know, where people could kind of grapple with these big questions without being afraid of any kind of, you know, reprisal or backlash. But it wasn't just these grand theological debates that were finding their way into the plays, right? There was also the influence of everyday religious culture. Like, how did that play a part?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Think about the sermons that people were hearing every week. Full of all these warnings against religious division. They often use the fall of Jerusalem as this big cautionary tale.
And Shakespeare kind of echoes that in King John, right? With the siege of Angiers. But even there, he adds his own little twist with the character of the bastard. Who really manipulates that whole historical example to kind of serve his own ambitions.
Right. So it's like Shakespeare's reminding us that history can be this really powerful tool. But it can also be, you know, twisted and reinterpreted.
To fit someone's own narrative, right?
Exactly.
So it's not just about recognizing those historical parallels in the plays. It's about understanding how Shakespeare uses them to create these really complex characters and drive the whole narrative forward.
Exactly, yeah. And it's all playing out, against this massive backdrop of the Protestant Reformation.
Oh, right.
Which wasn't just about these theological differences.
Yeah.
But it reshaped English society. And playwrights like Shakespeare, they're right in the middle of all this upheaval.
You can almost sense that tension, that feeling of a world kind of in flux.
Yes.
Like in his plays, it's like the ground is shifting beneath everyone's feet and nobody's quite sure where they stand.
And a really interesting example of this is the whole debate surrounding church ales.
Church ales. I'm not really familiar with that.
Oh, okay. Well, church ales were these festive gatherings that Puritans saw as these remnants of Catholicism that they wanted to get rid of.
So kind of like a holdover from an earlier time.
Exactly. They were essentially these big fundraisers held on church grounds where communities would come together, drink ale, socialize, celebrate religious holidays. But Puritans saw them as frivolous, even blasphemous.
Wow.
They wanted to abolish them.
Okay.
And, Shakespeare even subtly addresses this whole clash between tradition and the strict Puritan values, in Twelfth Night.
Oh, interesting. Which characters kind of embody that clash?
Think about Malvolio with his rigid morality.
Yeah.
Almost Puritan-like.
Right.
Contrasted with Sir Toby Belch, who's all about the revelry.
Yeah. He loves a good time.
Exactly. Shakespeare uses them to represent this broader cultural tension of the time.
It's so clever how he takes those everyday cultural clashes and just weaves them into his plays. Okay, so we've talked about how this whole religious culture is bubbling beneath the surface of all of Shakespeare's plays. But let's get even more specific. How about we take a closer look at how those theological ideas actually play out in some of his individual works?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Why don't we start with Measure for Measure?
Okay.
It really grapples with these big questions of law and justice and mercy, concepts that are central to both Christian and classical thought.
It's funny you mentioned classical thought. You wouldn't think a play about corrupt officials and sexual propositions.
Yeah, right. Would have much to do with ancient philosophy.
But that's what's so brilliant about Shakespeare. He finds these subtle connections.
Yeah.
Like in Measure for Measure, he connects these themes to the philosophy of Lucretius.
Okay.
Who was this Roman poet whose ideas about natural law were having a major comeback during the Renaissance.
So we're talking about, human nature, desire, those forces that drive us, those primal urges. How does that connect to Measure for Measure?
Well, you see, he contrasts those Lucretian ideas about desire, which were often seen as inherently selfish and potentially destructive, with the Christian views on sin and grace. And it creates this really interesting tension between those two ways of seeing the world.
So instead of, offering a clear-cut moral judgment, it's like he's presenting these two competing frameworks. And it's almost as if he's letting the audience kind of decide which one resonates with them more strongly.
Absolutely. And I think it makes the play much more engaging.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because it speaks to the complexity of both human behavior.
Right. And the systems we create to try and govern it. Shakespeare doesn't really offer easy answers.
No, he doesn't.
He makes us wrestle with the difficult questions.
Okay, so we've got Measure for Measure, all about these competing philosophical and religious perspectives on law and desire. What other play provides a really rich exploration of these theological ideas?
Well, why don't we move on to Macbeth?
Okay.
A tragedy that really goes deep into ambition, sin, and the very nature of evil.
Yeah, Macbeth always gets me thinking about the nature of evil and those forces that drive people to commit really terrible acts.
And it's really a reflection of those anxieties of the Reformation era.
Yeah.
Where the devil was seen as this incredibly powerful force actively tempting people towards wickedness.
And you see that so clearly in Macbeth himself. Seduced by those witches' prophecies and driven to do just awful things. It's like he's being manipulated by these forces beyond his control.
That's right. And this is where it gets really interesting, because we can actually draw a parallel between Macbeth
and the archetypal figure of Faustus.
Okay.
The scholar who makes a pact with the devil for knowledge and power.
Oh, right.
Both of them are grappling with that allure of evil.
Yeah.
And the question of, is repentance even possible?
Right.
After committing such horrific acts?
It makes you think about that whole idea of predestination.
Yes.
Which was a huge debate during the Reformation. If God has already chosen who will be saved and who will be damned, then do we really have free will? Is Macbeth even truly responsible for his actions? Or is he just a puppet in this big divine play?
It's a question that has haunted people for centuries.
And Shakespeare doesn't shy away from it. He doesn't give us any easy answers.
No.
He forces us to confront those unsettling possibilities
Right.
and wrestle with the complexities of, human choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we've explored plays that grapple with law, sin, even the nature of evil. But Shakespeare doesn't always leave us in darkness, does he? What about a play that explores, the brighter side of faith?
Right.
Forgiveness, redemption, the possibility of second chances.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Let's shift gears and talk about The Winter's Tale.
Okay.
It's a play that, despite all the tragic elements, ultimately offers a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I love that about The Winter's Tale. It just seems to suggest that even in the face of unimaginable loss and betrayal, there's still a chance for healing and renewal.
Right. And the way the play resolves, particularly that whole resurrection of Hermione, it raises some really interesting questions about what kind of faith Shakespeare is asking of his audience.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Is it a literal religious faith in miracles?
Okay.
Or is it a more metaphorical faith in, the transformative power of art?
Right.
And the human capacity for change?
Maybe it's a bit of both. It's like he's inviting us to believe in the power of storytelling, to offer us some solace and hope, even in the darkest of times. But speaking of shifting perspectives, our next play takes us into the world of English history, right?
Yes.
What can you tell us about Henry VIII?
Well, Henry VIII, which, by the way, has a rather dramatic history itself.
Oh, right. It was during a performance of this one that the Globe Theatre caught fire.
Exactly. Talk about drama, it takes us right into the heart of the Reformation.
Oh, yeah.
Exploring Henry's break with the Catholic Church.
That's right. It's a huge turning point, right?
Yeah.
And that play seems to tackle the very nature of historical truth.
That's right. Henry VIII really challenges that idea of history being a straightforward, objective account of events.
Okay.
Instead, it gives us multiple perspectives, interpretations, agendas. Like you see it in the way different characters will recount the same event.
Right.
Each offering a different version of, quote, the truth.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare's inviting us to question the reliability of those historical narratives.
Exactly. And what's really interesting, Henry VIII subtly uses all this language from the Psalms and liturgy, which gives this historical drama this kind of sacred dimension. It suggests that this political and religious upheaval wasn't just about power struggles, but had some really profound spiritual implications for everyone.
Right. So it kind of elevates the play beyond a simple historical chronicle.
Exactly.
It makes it about something much deeper.
Right. It becomes about that very human search for meaning, moral grounding in a world undergoing, these radical transformations.
Yeah. That's a question that resonates powerfully even today, right?
Absolutely.
As we kind of look at our own world. And it's a question I think we can continue to explore as we dig deeper into these sources and really uncover all those hidden layers of meaning that are woven into Shakespeare's really remarkable plays. It's fascinating how these questions about faith and individual conviction in a world that's constantly changing, it seems to resonate even across totally different time periods.
Yeah.
Like thinking about Henry VIII and that search for, moral grounding when everything's kind of fallen apart around you. It reminds me of, a completely different literary era and a writer who might seem worlds away from Shakespeare, Jane Austen.
That's a really interesting connection. I wouldn't have immediately thought of Austen, but now that you mention it, there are some intriguing parallels there.
Especially in a novel like Mansfield Park.
Oh, yeah.
And that character, Fanny Price, her deep religious faith is really what shapes all her actions, even when she's surrounded by all these people who seem way more concerned with social status and worldly pleasures and all that.
You're right. And it's not just Fanny. You see a similar kind of steadfastness in Henry VIII with characters like Queen Catherine.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Who really cling to their religious convictions, even when it puts them at odds with the most powerful people in the land.
It's almost like both Shakespeare and Austen, writing centuries apart, are exploring this tension between what you personally believe and the pressures of a society that's changing all around you.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that some human struggles just transcend time.
It really does. It speaks to that enduring power of Shakespeare's work. Even though he was writing in a very specific context, his plays continue to resonate with us centuries later because they tap into those kind of universal human experiences.
Yeah, those core things that we all grapple with no matter what century we live in.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered quite a lot of ground here in this deep dive into Shakespeare and religion. Before we move on, could you maybe kind of sum up some of the key takeaways for our listeners, just to, make sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways here is that we can't really fully understand Shakespeare's artistry if we don't consider the historical and religious context that shaped everything he did. His plays are just infused with the language, the debates, the anxieties of his time.
So it's not just about recognizing a biblical reference or a theological idea here and there. It's about understanding how those ideas really inform the characters, the plot, the entire message of the play.
Exactly, yeah. And it's important to remember, too, that Shakespeare wasn't writing theological treatises. He was a dramatist, a storyteller. And what fascinated him was human nature in all its kind of messy complexity.
So even when he's dealing with religious themes, he's doing it through the lens of drama, creating characters that are believable, flawed, ultimately human.
Precisely. And that's what makes those plays so captivating for us, I think. They offer this incredible window into the human condition.
Oh, yeah.
With all of its triumphs and tragedies and moments of grace and capacity for darkness.
I love that. And I think another key takeaway here is that there's always more to discover in Shakespeare. It's like he's left us with this endless well of insights. We can keep going back to his plays, uncovering new layers of meaning, new ways to connect with his work.
Absolutely. That's what makes studying Shakespeare so rewarding.
It never gets old, right?
It never gets old. It's not about finding the one right interpretation.
Yeah.
It's about engaging in this, this ongoing process of discovery and dialogue with the text.
It's about the journey, not the destination.
Exactly.
So as we move toward wrapping up this deep dive, I wanted to leave our listeners with kind of a final thought-provoking question. Based on all this stuff we've been talking about.
Ooh, I always love a good thought-provoking question. What do you have?
Well, considering all the religious turmoil of Shakespeare's time and the way he just kind of grapples with these huge questions about faith and morality in all of his plays, do you think Shakespeare's works offer a kind of, like an alternative faith, a belief in the power of storytelling itself, to help us make sense of the world, grapple with, those big questions in life?
That's a brilliant question. That really gets to the heart of what makes Shakespeare so enduring, doesn't it? Here he is, living in a world that's completely divided by religious beliefs.
Right.
And yet his plays, they create this space for exploration, for questioning, for finding meaning, like beyond the confines of dogma.
It's like he's suggesting that art itself can offer a kind of solace.
Yeah.
A way to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
Even if we don't, subscribe to a particular religious doctrine.
Exactly. And maybe that's Shakespeare's greatest legacy. Not to give us all the answers, but to inspire us to keep asking those big questions, keep searching for truth, keep believing in the power of stories to illuminate our lives.
It's like by really engaging with these timeless questions, Shakespeare, he kind of transcends the limitations of his own time. And he speaks to something really fundamental about the human experience itself.
Yeah. I think you've hit on something there. His plays almost become this bridge connecting us to the past.
Yeah.
While still speaking to our concerns in the present.
And that's really a testament to his genius, don't you think? I mean, to create works that can be interpreted and reinterpreted across centuries and cultures and still feel relevant.
It's remarkable. We may never really know for sure what Shakespeare himself believed.
Right.
But his plays, they offer this amazing invitation to explore these big questions about faith, morality, the meaning of life.
And he does it in a way that's both intellectually stimulating and emotionally engaging.
Right. Shakespeare didn't shy away from the messy complexities of being human.
No, he didn't.
He understood that life is full of contradictions, and there are very rarely easy answers to anything.
And I think that's why his plays continue to resonate with us so deeply. Because they reflect our own struggles, our own search for meaning in a world that can feel really confusing.
Exactly. We see ourselves in those characters. Grappling with similar dilemmas, wrestling with those same big questions that have haunted humanity forever.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here, I hope all of our listeners out there feel inspired to keep exploring Shakespeare's plays.
Me too. The beauty of Shakespeare is that he invites us to keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, keep discovering new layers of meaning. There's always more to uncover.
Yeah. Who knows, maybe by revisiting those plays and allowing ourselves to be challenged by the ideas they present, we might even come away with a deeper understanding of ourselves.
That's a wonderful thought to end on. Shakespeare's plays are a gift that just keeps on giving.
That's right, if we're open to receiving it.
Exactly.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Shakespeare and religion. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration.